All right. Welcome to Becky Live for April 2022. And today's topic is going to be on energy. What are the sources of energy and what do we do? So Becky Live is really about some intimate conversation about various leadership topics. And so my focus is really to provide some frames or some ways of looking at the topic to expand your awareness and thinking. And my hope is always that it isn't just a consumption of what I'm providing for you, but it sparks conversations that you have maybe with people that are important in your life or with coworkers as well. So I'm really, energy is a topic I'm really passionate about. So today we're going to cover, I always like to start with the origins of the word, where did it come from? And then today I'm going to focus on 4 sources of human energy. And I'm going to sometimes talk about it from an individual perspective and sometimes talk about it from an organizational perspective, just to kind of give us a taste of both. And that'll be our frame for today. So starting with just the origin of the word energy, it's interesting that it comes from the Latin word and a Greek word, really meaning activity, action, operation. It really is that force of expression, work. And what I found really interesting as I was looking at it is that it was used by Aristotle with a sense of actuality. This is real. This is existence. It's here in this moment rather than something that is potential. But what I find really fascinating as we kind of look into the different sources of human energy is that there actually is this relationship between the now and the potential. And so I really kind of think energy has both. What is in this moment, but what is it activating for the future as well? And then just, where I found another source where it talked about energy being the most encompassing and fundamental physical notion in modern science, which I found fascinating. And I would agree with that. But they look at energy from 4 fundamental forces: gravity, electromagnetism, I can't say the word, and the strong and weak nuclear forces. And so if we kind of think about that from a science perspective, I mean, it brings in a different meaning of energy. But again, that word energy really comes from Aristotle, meaning work. Again, being kind of that actuality or that activity of this moment. And so during COVID, it probably comes as no surprise that I had a lot of clients that were struggling and specifically struggling with energy. There were a lot of heavy things going on. And in fact, had a client in the healthcare industry that wanted me to talk with their healthcare workers about resiliency and managing energy. And so I knew of a couple of books, but I also went out. I have several colleagues that I know that are very high ranking military leaders. And so I reached out to them and I said, COVID kind of feels like the war zone. And I want to make sure these principles don't fall flat. I mean, what do you do during war? I mean, and it was interesting. Both of them said exactly what you are talking about is what we do. And I said, even on the front line. They said, absolutely, even on the front line, these elements still come into play. And so it didn't matter where I looked or who I talked to, it was really always coming up with these 4 quadrants. And so the 4 quadrants are really this element of physical energy, our mental energy, our emotional energy, and our spiritual energy. And so I'm going to talk about all 4 of these and kind of what we mean by that and how they kind of come into play. So our most fundamental need is to spend and renew energy. So we breathe in and we breathe out, and we can't do one very long without the other one needing to happen as well. And the physical energy is really the foundation of all the dimensions of energy, right? It's comprised of things like sleep, fitness, nutrition, and intermittent daytime rest and renewal. Now, what's interesting is there are a lot of things that we do know about physical energy, and yet there are a lot of things, that get segmented out. So we'll see a lot of things like, oh, this is the silver bullet, or this is the magic pill. You need to do keto, you need to run marathons, you need to be swimming, you need to avoid this, you need to have this superfood. And what the reality is that it's much more nuanced than that. Now, there are some things that we can kind of focus in on of maintaining our physical health, but each of us are very, very different. All right. Now, one thing that can be helpful, this matrix is a bit simplified, but it is helpful to look at it from this perspective. There are active ways of increasing energy, and there are passive ways of increasing energy. And then there are things that are more high octane versus low octane. And so we want to stay in the spots of chill and energize, and we want to have a good balance between those right-hand elements. We want to avoid the elements on the left, right? These are things that give us these momentary energy or momentary numbing, but don't really get us sustainable energy, right? And so what I do like about this quadrant is it can give us some quick wins of, okay, yeah, I probably should reduce my sugar intake and move more into complex carbohydrates. It can give us just some quick wins that we can gain. But honestly, it's a lot more nuanced than this. And the Eastern medicine traditions, or even the indigenous traditions, really looked at treating the whole person in their physical health. And so if you look at things like our Ayurvedic approaches, there are different levels of energy. So they kind of have 3 different types of energy, and it's important to know what kind of energy you are. We all have different metabolisms, and those metabolisms change as we age. And so it's important to know what works for you. And what I have found is that we have become so separated from our body and our awareness of our body that we're not even in tune with what we need. And in fact, your body gives you many signals on what it needs. So for some individuals, a boot camp is going to be a perfectly acceptable way to energize and exercise. For someone like me, that my body seems to hold on to inflammation, when I have that big burst of inflammation in a boot camp, I actually get very, very sick. So I have to rely on different forms of exercise that don't aggravate inflammation or create big bursts of inflammation, so that I can stay healthy. And so what works for us in this moment may not work for others. And what works for us in this moment may not work 10 years from now. All right. 10 years from now, I might have a different relationship with inflammation in my body. But the important part is to get grounded back into how my body feels, paying attention to the choices I'm making, and am I really energizing myself? But also, I want you to notice that you need to take breaks. All right. And in fact, I remember I was working with one leader that was feeling very burnt out, and they didn't take breaks at all during the day. They didn't even take a lunch break. And I said, could you just commit to taking a lunch break every day? I said, could you do 30 minutes? And it just completely freaked them out to take a 30-minute break. And so I said, could you do 15 minutes, just 15 minutes stepping away from your computer and taking a break? And they said, yes, they could commit to that. So they committed to that for 3 weeks, came back, and they had started to paint again. Like, they couldn't believe how just taking that one short break really energized them. So physical energy is the foundation and really, really key, but it needs to be balanced, and it needs to be what works for us as individuals. All right. The next one is really about emotional energy and about happiness. So this is learning to cultivate kind of some specific emotions that are associated with high performance. And how we feel has a profound influence on how we perform. All right. And so we really need to be aware of that and pay attention to that. And again, these books have some great quadrants to help us begin to understand things. And this time I want to look at it from an organizational perspective, all right? And so if we have certain behaviors going on that are negative, all right, this is going to have an emotional effect, not only on individuals, but also collectively. And, I have had some clients that worked in very toxic situations where criticism was something that was a common day occurrence, confrontation, lashing out, demeaning people. But even kind of the lower side, when we detach or withdraw or avoid people or give up on them, it has an impact on that emotional energy of that individual, but also collectively. I think most of us have heard that emotions are contagious. And so if these things are going on, even just for one person, it does tend to kind of feed into the rest of the situations. Versus where if we're focusing on things that are a challenge, to push, to inspire, or to celebrate, reward, recognize, it creates a different type of emotion and allows us some different things. So the next one is mental energy, which is really about focus. And wow, there are so many distractions today. And in fact, your phone, your apps, email, everything has got a notification to it, and everything is dinging for your attention. All right. And when our attention is kind of always shifting and changing, it is consuming energy, and there's only so much energy available. So what I see is a lot of people spend their energy in really shallow work. And one of my colleagues, Dr. Richard Clayton, has done a great job of looking at the workplace to say, what kind of work needs to happen? There's deep work, there's shallow work, there's collaborative work, there's learning work, and to really think about what are those mental conditions that need to occur. We also can only do so much of some of like the heavy mental lifting. When I'm doing deep thinking and deep work, there is a limit to how much my brain can handle. And then I have to take a mental break and do something that's just kind of silly or fun, to give my brain a chance to take a break and to get renewed. And I want to just look at this from the individual mind. And again, this is a little bit oversimplistic, but it just helps us begin to understand these elements. We've got, when we're distracted, what happens? You've got the reactive zone and the scattered zone. And maybe you have felt this sometimes, of feeling spaced out, overwhelmed, or inefficient, impulsive. And then you've got more of the tactical zones of being logical, task-oriented, and a big picture. Now, our emotional energy and our physical energy play into these, all right? So if I am not, I can tell, I will feel this kind of, for me, I feel a little scattered, or I feel disconnected. And that's a cue to me that, okay, I need to spend some time in my breath. I need to go back to the physical energy. I need to spend some time with my breath to regulate my nervous system, and I need to get some movement in. And it always moves me beyond that scattered space every single time. And what I try to do is to do those things purposely on the physical energy to make sure that my individual mind can be working. Even foods can impact this. Foods can take us into these reactive or scattered zones as well. So paying attention to what is working for us and what's happening in our body. And the last one is spiritual. And we tend to avoid talking about this, right? But energy derives really from serving something bigger than ourselves, all right? And so other people, thinking about and connecting with the awe of nature. These are all things that help us see and create energy in new and different ways. And spiritual energy can come in many different forms. For some people, it comes through religious practices or religious rituals. For some individuals, it comes from being connected to nature and doing nature-based activities. You can even find the spiritual in the arts community. I get a lot of spiritual energy from reading poetry or going to watch the ballet or going to watch an opera. And so it's just important for us to know what brings spiritual energy for me, what helps me connect that I'm just part of this bigger world, this bigger galaxy, what helps me get that feeling. From an individual perspective, again, we want to kind of think about our life, what is value depleting or value free, and we need to be looking at how can we be more value driven or value adding, of creating kind of that sense of awe, that sense of wonder, that sense of mystery. From an organizational perspective, just a different way of looking at it. A lot of cultures and organizations are deficit focused rather than abundant focused. And our values and our behaviors really kind of craft. So there is a spiritual element in organizations, and it's okay to be thinking about it that way. And in fact, rituals can be very symbolic in creating these spiritual kind of feelings. And it does somewhat come back to purpose, although I do think purpose, the emphasis can sometimes be, a little skewed. But it is also about kind of that, what really connects with my heart, what really excites me, what connects me with the awe and the mystery. And we can do that in organizations as well. So bottom line, 4 different sources of energy that can either give us energy or consume energy. It happens at the individual level. It happens at the collective level. And the collective level can be in many different realms. It can be our families. It can be the organizations that we're a part of. It can be the communities in which we live. And so those are all things we have choices about as well, both individually, but also how we interact with the collective, and how do we make sure that we're having things that are activating the energy and that we're part of activating the energy for other people as well. So that's just some of the things that I conceptualize and work with energy when I'm, for myself, and also when I'm working with my clients. So some upcoming events that we have. So in May, we've got 2 events. It's a little bit earlier in the month, so the dates did change. If you did sign up, just make note of those date changes. We're going to be talking about emotional intelligence on May 10th. And then the Becky Live next month, I'm going to be talking about empathy. Empathy is kind of being thrown out as this magic pill or silver bullet. And while it can be super helpful, it can also be overused. And so we're going to be talking about that. And then in June, I'm going to really be focusing on management of our learning together. We'll be focusing on how do we manage on these different planes of information, people, and action. And then my Becky Live is going to focus on frames. How do frames come into how we manage, and how do we purposefully use them? So I hope today you found helpful. I would love to support your organization in energy or leadership needs. So if you want to get a hold of me, here's how to get a hold of me. And now I am going to say goodbye to those of you that are watching this later on. And for those that are live with me, I'm going to stop the recording so that we can have a chat.